One of the challenges to preach when you have become to some degree dependent on the ability to show you things is that I have to kind of resort to doing it a little bit of a different way this morning. So I don't know whether you caught this little cartoon in the Butler Eagle this week. I would have intended for you to see it, and you probably can't see it here, but let me describe it to you. The cartoon is a mom who is sitting in her chair, and she is reviewing her son's new math textbook. She's flipping through the pages, and she finds there's instruction about addition, and there's instruction about subtraction, and there's instruction about multiplication. But try as she might, she can't find any instruction about division in the textbook. And so she says to her son, "What's up? Where's the division part in this textbook?" And not missing a beat, the son says, "Oh, we talk about division now in current events." Sunday morning last week, we started to talk a little bit about the craziness of the world that we are living in right now. And we just kind of put some boundaries on that craziness to be just the last month. If you were here, you remember we mentioned the shooting in Minneapolis. We talked about the fact that Charlie Kirk was killed, and that very same day there was another shooting at a school in Denver. And then we talked about right here at home, we seem to be fixated on this 9-year-old little girl named Renesmee Yutzi that was brutally murdered in Fayette County. I wish I could tell you that the headlines in the Butler Eagle this past week have been a little better, but they weren't. Here's just a few of those headlines. The bodies of 3 infants found in an Armstrong County home. And the day after that headline was written, the count rose from 3 to 4. Cabot man accused of rape and assault of a young girl. Parker man arrested for child endangerment and drug possession. On Thursday of this past week, the headline read, 3 officers killed and 2 critically injured by gunfire in York, Pennsylvania. We talked a little bit last week about the fact that the cause for all of that is many things. The selfish use of firearms. We talked about that. We talked a little bit about the fact that the media loves to sensationalize things, don't they? And we talked about the whole business of social media and the impact that social media is having on our culture. In fact, we can't disagree with one another in this culture right now. We can't have a civil conversation with somebody unless there's violence involved, it seems. I read something from Governor Shapiro this week. He was responding to the police shooting, and here's what he said: "This kind of violence is not okay. We need to do better as a society." That's what our governor said. And I have to be honest with you, my initial reaction, my immediate reaction to that statement was, how? How do we do better as a society? I had the audacity to suggest last week that maybe what the fix is for society, the fix for the thing that ails us, is heart surgery. If we could clean up our hearts somehow, maybe the world would be a better place, or at least this little part of it that your hearts and my hearts are connected to. We talked about what Jesus said about our hearts. Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. What you see visibly in a life flows directly from the heart. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything else flows from it. I had a conversation with a friend this week, and he introduced me to an image that Tony Evans uses in his book, The Battle is the Lord's. I don't know whether you know the name Tony Evans or not. He's an African-American preacher, he's a pretty prolific writer. But in this particular book, Tony Evans talks about the overflow principle. And here's what he meant. He says, when you think about it, what's in your heart right now overflows, first of all, to the people who are the closest to you. Think about that, right? What's in your heart overflows, first of all, to your spouse, or to your family, or to your friends, or to the people that's in your network. And then Tony says from there, as it's overflowed from you into them, it overflows from them into their own network. And before you know it, we're talking about a much broader community. And from there, it overflows into a region, and it overflows into a nation, and it overflows into a world. Do you catch it? It all starts with what flows out of one heart. Dare I say, maybe that's the reason we are where we are in the world that we live in today. So I guess the question that I've been wrestling with this week is, where do you start to clean up our hearts? If everything flows from our hearts, where do we start to clean it up? I want us to spend a little bit of time in the Old Testament book of Ezra this morning. That's not a go-to book. It's not a place that we find ourselves frequenting often. But I read something in Ezra last month that really spoke to me. Let me tell you what's going on in Ezra. The people of God have been in exile in a country called Babylon for 70 years. They were carried off from their homeland into Babylonia by a powerful army led by a guy named Nebuchadnezzar. That's the name for your next dog, by the way. Nebuchadnezzar. Over that period of 70 years or so, this powerhouse country, Babylonia, starts to weaken. Finally, they are conquered by the Persians in 539 BC. A guy by the name of Cyrus led the charge. He would become known historically as Cyrus the Great. A year after he conquers Babylonia, 538 BC now, he issues this edict that says to the Israelites, any of you who want to go home, you can go home. Here's the first 3 verses of chapter 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and He has appointed me to build a temple for Him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of His people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. That's the edict, right? Now imagine yourself in this country 70 years. I'm 63. And I got to be honest with you, when I was 20, 70 seemed like ancient. But they were there for 70 years. And finally, they get the word that they can go home. How quick do you think you would pack? Pretty fast, right? So that's what they do. They gather their things and they head home to Jerusalem. But they're going home with a purpose. Here's what happens when they arrive. This is Ezra 3. When the 7th month came, and the Israelites had settled in their towns, the people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. Then Joshua, son of Jozadak, and his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his associates, began to build the altar of the God of Israel, to sacrifice burnt offerings on it in accordance with what is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. Despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both morning and evening sacrifices. Then, in accordance with what is written, they celebrated the festival of tabernacles with a required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day. After that, they presented the regular burnt offerings, the new moon sacrifices, and the sacrifices for all the appointed sacred festivals of the Lord, as well as those brought as free will offerings to the Lord. Now here, get this. On the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, though the foundation of the Lord's temple had not yet been laid. I want us to think about that. Because see, here's what the people do. The people get settled in their town, and the work of temple construction begins. That's the purpose that they're there for. But did you catch the fact that they don't start to reconstruct the temple by clearing away all of the rubble and starting to lay new foundation? Did you catch that? I mean, that's how we would probably do it. We would probably clear away there and start over from the ground up. Did you catch what they did? The first thing they built was what? Was the altar. The first thing they built was the altar. It's as if to say that, you know what, the most important thing about this project is not the building itself. It's what goes on in the building. And it's only after the worship starts, it's only after the altar is built and the sacrificial system resumes, it's only then do they start to work on putting the foundation stones in place. They begin with what God says should happen in that building first. They reconstruct the altar. They come back to the practices of worship. So when I read that last month, I've come to recognize that the Holy Spirit, when He wants me to see something, often gives me two words: pay attention. And when I read that, I heard that, pay attention. So I went back and looked at it a little closer, and I discovered, you know what, there is a principle for heart renewal in those verses. And here it is. A renewed heart has to begin at the altar. It has to start with worship. See, the starting line for heart change, for cleaning up our hearts and setting us on a path toward where God wants us to be, has to be to look clearly at what our core motivation is. What's the truth that is non-negotiable in our hearts, from which everything else flows? I thought about Jesus. If I were to ask you the question, what was the core motivation of Jesus' life? Think about that. There can really only be one answer. The core motivation of Jesus' life was love and devotion to His Father. And it was that love and devotion that made Him surrender His life to be faithful to the purpose of God in His life. God led Him, devotion led Him to surrender His life to the purpose that God has. Now, can we talk a minute about the fact that love and devotion is a way of talking about worship? Think about that. Jesus worshiped God because He knew who God was for Him. It was His awareness of who God was that drew Him to worship. He would say this in John chapter 10, "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. Do you see it? It's worship that then becomes servanthood. It becomes faithfulness to the purpose of God. Sisters and brothers, your heart and my heart are going to experience renewal when we get to know deeply who God is. That's what this next sermon series is going to be about. Who is God? What is it that God does in our life that would call forth our worship of Him? Look, worship isn't about whether we play a piano or whether we play a guitar, whether we play drums. Worship is about the one who is here to meet us. Worship is about the fact that God alone deserves the worship that comes from His people. And when we get to know who He is, we'll understand why God alone is the one that deserves our worship. See, heart renewal has to start with a really intense look at what is the object of our love and devotion. What's the primary object? I mean, if I were to ask that question of you, what's the primary object of your love and devotion? There could be a whole bunch of different answers to that, right? Think about it, right? My spouse is the primary object of my love and devotion. Every man in here ought to be nodding yes right now. My spouse is the primary object of my love and devotion. How many of us would say our children are the primary objects of our love and devotion? How about our parents? Let's broaden it. How about our job? How about success? How about power? All of those things can be the primary object of our love and devotion. But watch this. It's one thing to say that the primary object of my love and devotion is my parents, my spouse, my children, and I love God too. It's one thing to say that. It's a completely different thing to say the primary object of my love and devotion is God. And because I am devoted to Him, I understand what it means to love my spouse, what it means to love my children, what it means to love my parents. See, a renewed heart has to start at the altar. It has to start with worship. And by the way, a renewed church starts there too. I've shared with you before, I think, that in addition to the Scriptures, or besides the Scriptures, one of the most important books I've ever read about the church is this one called The Presence-Based Church by Terry Takel. I've shared bits and pieces of it with you before, but I've been thinking about what it means to start at the altar, and the Lord kind of brought me back to that book this week to two places. Listen to this. To be presence-based, Terry says, is to be completely dependent on God's presence for everything. Or to turn it around, to be presence-based means that without God's presence, the church would cease to exist. And then he talks about worship. Terry says, for most of the regular members, Sunday morning worship is just an extension of their lives during the week. Get it? An extension of their lives. Many have learned to practice worship as a lifestyle in their cars, at home, even on the job. You ever been standing at a stop sign or stopped at a stoplight and somebody pulls up to you and the windows are down in their car and there's music coming out of that car? You ever been there? What kind of music comes out of that car? Boom, 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 right? And can you honestly say that there's ever been a moment when you have stopped at a stop sign, somebody's pulled up to you with the windows down, and there's worship music coming out of the car? By the way, there's some worship music that goes boom, boom, boom too. But what Terry's trying to suggest is that what we do here is an extension of what happens day by day. We're back to Tony Evans, aren't we? It's the overflow principle. Our worship in the course of the week, when we learn that worship is more than just what we do here on an hour, all of a sudden then what we do here in an hour has so much more power because we've been worshiping throughout the week. Renewed hearts overflow into a renewed church. By the way, renewed hearts overflow into renewed marriages and renewed relationships and renewed attitudes, renewed perspectives on life. Renewed hearts translate into renewed joy and renewed peace in life. Would you say that in the world that we live in today, there is an absence of joy in so many places? Because of the culture we live in, we're always angry at one another. But when you come to know who God is, truly, there can be joy in a way you've never experienced before. One of the books that I read almost every day in my devotions is this book by Dennis Kinlaw called This Day with the Master. I've been through it I don't know how many different times. September the 18th, this past Thursday, Dr. Kinlaw talked about one of the most effective illustrations he's ever seen in his life. He was at a retreat center, and the presenter was a Baptist preacher by the name of Peter Lord. And he remembers that Peter was up on the stage, and he had his arm extended like this, and he had a glass of water in his hand. And he invited a young woman from the group to come up on the stage and join him there. And he said to the young woman, "Now, what I want you to do is take hold of my arm, and I want you to shake it vigorously." Now, remember this, he's got a glass of water in his hand. Okay? And so he says, "I want you to shake this arm very vigorously." And the young woman looks at him and, "Yeah, seriously?" And he says, yeah, seriously. So she takes a hold of his arm and she shakes it vigorously. Now, picture in your mind what's going on with the water. Talk to me. What's going on with the water? It's going everywhere. Then Peter Lord said this to the young woman. "Now, tell me, what was it that made the glass spill water?" And her immediate answer was, "Well, it's because I shook your arm." And he said, "Actually, that's not the case. What made the glass spill water was the fact that there was water in the glass." Dennis Kinlaw remembers Peter Lord saying this: "A fellow at work irritates you, but it's not really he who irritates you. He just sloshes out the irritation that's already present in your own heart." Sin originates in you. A person who receives a promotion a little faster than you, and you find out you are fighting jealousy, that jealousy is already inside of you. And all that the other person did was bring it to the surface, what already dwelt in your heart. No one can provoke inside of you what does not originate there. I had a first-hand experience with this a couple weeks ago. I was driving home from church. I was going down South Duffy. And I came up to the intersection between South Duffy and Route 68. You know where the record store is right there? That's where I was. And I came up to a red light, and I was first in line. And I could tell, I don't know whether you do this or not, when you're sitting at a red light, you watch the other light for it to wait to turn yellow, and you start to rev up the engine, right? So I was watching the other light, and it started to turn yellow, and just as it did, there was this tractor trailer that came on 68, came around the corner and turned, and then went about, I don't know, maybe 50 feet, and stopped right in the middle of the lane. My light turned red, and I continued through the intersection and pulled up behind this tractor trailer, who was stopped dead in the lane. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and before long there was a line behind me all the way into the intersection and beyond. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, you know what? This is not a good place to be. There's going to be an accident here. And you know what? That reasoning caused me to lay on my horn. Right? I mean, after all, I'm preventing an accident. Finally, brake lights turned to four-way flashing lights. And I'm going, oh, this is not going to get any better. And so I peeked my head out the window around the side of the truck to see that there was nobody coming. And I pulled out around the guy and I hit the horn again. And as if to say, you know what, this is not a good place for you to be. Do you know what he did in response? Pulled on his own horn. And then I realized what was really going on. I really wasn't angry. I really wasn't worried about an accident. I was frustrated and angry that he had inconvenienced me. It came out. It was already in there. And it just sloshed out because of that moment. What if this week you and I paid a little closer attention to the altars that we're bowing at in our hearts? What if before you and I respond to what's happening around us, we intentionally took the time to get in touch with what's going on within us? Before you respond to that Facebook or Instagram post, before you offer comments about the anger that's directed at you, before you choose to participate in a conversation that you've walked into and share what you really think about things, before you do any of that, check your heart. What altar are you bowed down to in those moments? You remember the name Eric Liddell? Remember that name from Chariots of Fire fame? Eric once said this: "We are all missionaries. Wherever we go, we either bring people nearer to Christ or we repel them from Christ." And where does it all start? Right here.